What's going on, collective listeners? How we doing today? Today we have Nick Mascioli, who is the director of athletic performance at the Second Baptist School. He's awesome, dude, man. This was a lot of fun. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this podcast. We discuss specifically that transition from going from one job where performance and wins and losses are the ultimate goal and the ultimate decision maker in terms of your job, to working with a younger population and obviously really trying to focus on the specific tasks and the demands that they have in terms of trying to build out robust humans and getting them to have a more higher quality relationship when it comes to training, education around that training, and obviously living a longer and more robust life. So enjoy this podcast. There's a lot. We go in a lot of different angles here, but Nick really brings a lot of good content and a lot of good information. So enjoy it. Nick, what's going on? For all of you guys who just tuned in, we're actually discussing the difference between food situations from the South and from the Northeast to the South. So yeah, but as I was saying, I just feel like being down South was it was a good experience. It was cool. When I was at Alabama, it was great and everything like that. But it was just I knew there was one spot called Geno's, and I was I'm not going to go there because it's just not important for me to get that's not why I'm down here. You know what I mean? It's if I you know what I mean? I just don't think it would have been right. My mom's from Italy, and I think we would have had some serious problems if I had gone to Geno's, you know what I mean? So she's that's why coming back, I was dude, I need some pizza. I need to, and I don't want to we don't have to get into listen, you want pizza, you're gonna go to Philly, you're gonna go to New Haven, Connecticut, you're gonna go to New York, right? Obviously there's Chicago's in there, but I think New Haven actually just won the pizza bowl or whatever it was. I forget I forget the name of it, but it was, I think some Instagram account holds this bracket or whatever where it's they go through or whatever. But I think Philly was in the final 2 or 3 or something like that. They always there's good people. It's wherever the Italians decided to migrate when they came over here. They landed in New York, New Jersey, obviously Connecticut, and then Philly, and then a little bit in Boston, right? So it was they just decided to hang out there, and that was where pizza was locked into. But anyway, Nick, thanks for joining us, man. This is good stuff. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and kind of tell us and me, obviously, your story, right? Kind of take us through where this whole thing started and where you're at now. And you could even run through obviously what you guys are doing at the Second Baptist School.
Yeah, no problem. Anthony, thanks for having me too. Really, really appreciate it. And I'd love to tell a little bit about my story. Glad that I'm on here. And so really for me, wow, athletics has always been just a really strong passion of mine. Ever since I was a kid, my dad really just sort of instilled that into me. Was a great basketball player, and we just played all different types of sports: basketball, soccer, baseball. Baseball was probably the one that I was most accustomed to. So fortunate enough to play college baseball at Westchester University, just outside of Philadelphia, and just really made some good relationships there. Also was part of a national championship team in 2012. So that was pretty cool to sort of get what that winning concept was sort of like. And from there, really, I had a lot of injuries in college. I had one severe injury in high school, then really these non-contact, injuries that sort of were occurring in baseball that really sort of stunted my career. And, sort of was just going through the mindset of, hey, if I really had somebody that maybe sort of knew what they were doing in the weight room or in some way, shape or form, could this have been avoided? And obviously we all know that, resistance training can help reduce the risk, but it's never gonna, fully solve the issue. But, it just sort of went down that rabbit hole and, really like physical fitness. And so originally majored in pre-physical therapy, and then really realized I liked the exercise science side of things and the weight room. And so graduated from there in 2014, actually did a really my biggest mentor, Rob Rabina, who is a great strength coach in the area in Philadelphia. He primarily worked with baseball players, was one of Eric Cressy's first interns. So really sort of that I felt like that was my first really good taste of what strength conditioning sort of was. I remember being my last semester of college and almost realizing in 6 months I was going to be having to be a coach of some sort, and I felt so underqualified and underprepared. So I really felt like it was a blessing, man. I just ran into him, and he just sort of gave me just some really good tools and understanding concepts of what I thought good training was like, and just started learning how to coach from there. I worked with him for a year, went to massage therapy school actually, to get my soft tissues license. And then through there, did another internship in 15 with at Indianapolis Fitness and Sports Training with Mike Robertson and Bill Hartman.
Wow.
And then through there, I really got I mean, that was an unbelievable experience, just sort of learning under those guys in that lens. And then, they sort of were able to get me connection in professional baseball. I ended up being able to take a job as a minor league strength coach with the Pittsburgh Pirates from 2016 to into 2018. Really just good experience and fond memories there, just working in professional baseball and learning from Joe Hughes, who was my boss at the time. And they sort of really ran like almost like a collegiate style of training there, even in the midst of professional baseball, which was really cool. So I sort of got a little bit of that feel, and then really just realized that, I think I wanted to find like a different avenue. I think that's what's so interesting about strength conditioning, right? It's just like, there's just so many different niches that you can get into. And actually went back to grad school at East Stroudsburg University, got my master's degree.
Nice.
And at that moment, I was like, hey, like, I'm 27, going into 28, like, man, I got to find another job again. And I had a couple things lined up. Actually was thinking about teaching classes at East Stroudsburg, and then maybe do some private stuff with a friend of mine. And, got a random phone call from an old high school friend that I worked with. He connected me with someone that he was working with, who was an athletic director at Second Baptist School. They were looking for a new strength coach. And I've always was really intrigued about just that dynamic of high school strength conditioning. It just seemed like a really cool fit, and just a really cool group and setting of kids to work with. And and that was like February 2019. And so 3 months later, I'm down June 1st, and I took the job. And so I haven't really looked back. And so been at Second Baptist from June of 2019 till now, and it's definitely been such a blessing. And I love it. It's funny. I think, for anyone that's maybe an aspiring strength coach or working in the professional field, I think, there's always this feeling of like, wow, I need to like find my dream job or the right fit right out of college. And, I can be the first one to tell you, it takes a while to sort of see maybe what type of avenue that you would fit in or really fit your lifestyle. And, it took me about 6, 7, 8 years to figure that out. And then once I got to Second Baptist and being in that high school, middle school setting, I was like, man, this is for me, And so, I'm the director of athletic performance at Second Baptist School. So I work with 6th grade through 12th grade. 6th through 8th is primarily through their curriculum in PE. And so we sort of see our kids 2 times a week, just teaching them just fun foundational movement patterns, progressive overload principles, and really just giving kids an appreciation for the weight room and just taking care of their bodies. And then really just trying to move that into high school as they get a little bit more, I would say serious with their athletics. And then even for students that don't play sports, just once again, just continuing to model like what it means to take care of your body and give kids lifelong skills. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've really learned as a high school and middle school strength conditioning coach, is that really at our school, we have multi-sport athletes. And then from those kids, 1% of those kids are potentially going to find their place at a collegiate level playing college sports. And so the other 99% of our kids aren't going to have that exposure, so like, what am I doing to teach these kids lifelong skills beyond, their tenure at Second Baptist School, because even then after that, it's like, man, even if I do get a college, a scholarship, we just had an athlete of ours just get accepted to Villanova. He played his first year football at Villanova University, and it's like, well, man, his career could be done in 3 years, and it's like, well, that's still short. That's still a short career. It's like, man, you still got, Lord willing, 40, 60 years ahead of yourself, and so, to me, the value is like, if I got a phone call, like when I'm 65 years old and retired, maybe from a kid that's 50, I'm like, hey, coach, like I'm still like taking care of my body and, learning how to exercise. Like those are the things I think really like are life lasting and what really make me excited about what I do. So obviously with our program, we try to give it a collegiate aspect niche just to get our kids that exposure, but at the same time we're also trying to get our kids exposure to all different types of fitness and exercise training modalities to get them involved into that experience and learning how to take care of themselves.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm almost wondering, like, don't you think that, I mean, this is obviously regardless, like even some of the kids who actually go on and play college sports, right? Like you said, like the careers could end fairly quickly, but couldn't even make the argument of like college strength and conditioning coaches who are working with like 18 and 22-year-old kids, even like despite the fact that obviously there's a large push towards obviously preparing them for their sport. And I would be the first one to tell you, right? We need to be specific in terms of like the demands and how we go about actually preparing them for their sport. No doubt about it. But I mean, like you said, even at that level, like the amount of those kids who are actually going to go on and play even further than that, right? Who's like actually going to be able to extend their career beyond those 4 years that they're playing in college is very minimal. And so what I see now a lot, in terms of like working with general population is like the forgotten athletes, right? Like those who were like, I was once an athlete, and as soon as I became a non-athlete, everyone forgot about me or didn't care because it wasn't providing value to the university or whatever anymore, or whatever school, I was part of. Right. And so, don't you think that it might actually be pretty beneficial for even collegiate strength and conditioning coaches who might be listening to this podcast to continue to expose all of their athletes to a wide range of training modalities and fitness levels and try to get them a better and like a healthier relationship, I would say, with their outlook on training, right? Because I think right now what you see in college strength and conditioning is they have to do it, right? Like I talk to a lot of collegiate athletes. It's like, yeah, I have to, like, I have a schedule, like I signed up for this, right? I have a scholarship. So they're like, we expect you to go to class. We expect you to go to training. We expect you to come to practice. We expect you to be at, rehab, prehab by this time, that kind of deal. And it has a little bit more of like, and I'm not saying that like it should or shouldn't be that way, but it just is. So like they have to do it or whatever the case is. That's not really the point that I'm trying to make here. My point is because of how structured and how rigid it can be, it creates this outlook on training and this perception of training for a lot of the kids that I think that are involved is like, oh, this is a chore, this is a task that I need to accomplish, as opposed to as you get into your adult years, it's like, I need to wake up. I need to challenge my body physically and mentally throughout the day and do some things that are uncomfortable, right? And here's how I need to go about approaching this. It doesn't have to be in the same way that it was when I was preparing to, crash up against another human being for, X amount of minutes per day, right? It just needs to be, here's how often I need to lift. Here's how often I need to lift in order to get this type of response, in order to continue to maintain some robustness and resiliency. And here's how often I need to do some sort of aerobic work and maybe even touch on some sprint, like, you know what I mean? Like the idea of training itself, right? So is that, I mean, it seems like that's what you guys are doing there. And I guess my question is, don't you see that like that, do you think that it could be also possible for even people who are working at the, collegiate and professional sectors of like, hey, I know I'm going to prepare you for your sport physically, but at the same time, I am going to kind of change your outlook and your perception on like what training is, how to approach it, and actually expose you to a wider range of different fitness modalities to make it so that you actually are prepared for life way beyond what we're going to do here and now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree, and it's, it's so funny because the field has really gotten to where like, man, I listen to a podcast like this, there's so much data and information on the field where it's like, man, like I'm just so like not smart, just like there's just so much information, and so there's just so many different ways to I think really get your athletes or for you maybe some gen pop people to like some of the goals where they need to get, and obviously there's just general principles that like sort of like are, hey, like these are things that most people should do, and they're going to sort of get into everything else. But I really totally agree with that, that I think creating this environment of and that's really where we are with like our program. It's like actually we really don't have like the, hey, you have to do this as a coach thing at our school. Like, for me, I have to create the positive environment, for our kids that actually want to be in the weight room, and so the kids that actually come through our weight room are kids like, wow, they see the value. And so I think when you can always link something to education or something that they have value in, it always creates that buy-in. It makes it personal for them, and so sure. That's something that's really important to me. And that's how we sort of are moving with our class structure is that, we have a pass-fail course now. We're making it a graded academic course next year. And then for the year after, hopefully we can even make it more, honors related, so kids are actually learning these principles of why they're training,
Yeah.
And so it's like, why are we back squatting the back squat? Do you have to back squat? What other variations are there? Like there's just so many questions that you can get these kids to answer. And then I think when you bring them along with the journey, like when you involve them, then it creates this like, wow, it makes it personal. And now I want to do it even more. And so like when you
Yeah.
like, not saying that to give kids choices all the time, there's just different like, hey man, I'm just not going to do that with you because I love you too much,
Right.
but it's like, hey, like, okay, like, if we're talking about like, hey, we're going to get some hamstring work in. I mean, I think there's a 60 different exercises you probably could pick where it's like, hey, maybe some autonomy there and like, hey, like, here's a menu that you can choose from,
Yeah.
and like, here's why. Oh, I like this one because it does this and I'm still getting the same result. It's like, I think involving him in those ways, like it, because at the end of the day, for, those kids that aren't going to play on the field, it's like, man, like, that's what you're going to probably be doing on a regular basis for years and years on end. And so
Yeah.
at the college level, for sure. I mean, I think, I'll say at college, I mean, there's more presence on winning. And then like, you have a small group
Right.
of kids, there's a lot of different things, but I still think there's ways for you to be able to do that to that kid. It was like, hey man, like there's just so much value in here. And I think especially with your athletes at the college level that maybe aren't like your tier one guys, right, or girls that are just going to be your game changers, any way you can sort of help push the thermostat with those lower level to mid, I think is
Yeah.
always going to help, your team out, whether that's even them just being more athletic to make your starters even better, just to give them more exposure to what a game like her like in practice, if that's
Right.
the case, but I think once you show value in exercise and I actually too, it's actually funny. I talked to Mike Tucker. You had him on the podcast, I would say a couple months ago. So I actually had some good conversations with him because he actually has two of my athletes
Oh, okay.
with the football team. So like we had some good conversations. And he even said the same thing, like, with one of my guys, honestly, probably the strongest guy that ever's walked through my weight room. And like, he's even saying to me, it's like, hey man, like, dude, like we are just doing like simple things like over and over again, and we're going to keep doing that till like the day we die, and it's like, you keep the simplicity with it. And then, that just allows like your kids just to appreciate like just the consistency factor of different things and whatnot, and so, I think just in the college setting, right, it's just there is ways to do it for sure. Obviously there's probably some things that you have to take in consideration, but anyway, any type of way, shape, or form that you can get guys exposure to just falling in love with exercise, I think that's always a win for your program. And like, not being like completely like, oh, like I'm completely married to like these 10 exercises
Right.
and like we're going to do these to the day we die. Because at least in my population, obviously like I have a model and an umbrella of what I want to see. And I really think of things more of like patterns, right? Like, hey, like we're trading patterns rather than like, oh, like, we're this specific exercise. And
Right.
so whatever is going to fill that bucket for that kid, we'll do it, and then like you just have some more further conversation. Hey, like, you're a baseball player, like maybe try this exercise instead, and letting
Right.
kids like understand just different concepts is huge.
Yeah, and I think, and it's funny because when Stephanie, our editor, initially reached out to me about having you on the podcast, she was saying how you were like, yeah, he was working at X and here, but he thought he could have a bigger impact, obviously working in the capacity that you're working in now. And I kind of think of it as the same way, like my brother's a mechanic, and I think of it in the same way. Whereas I say to myself, I wish I had more exposure to a lot of the things, a lot of the trades when I was younger, right? But when like we grew up, like I went to private school because my parents wanted me to go to college and things like that, right? So you're like, and they wanted me to, I was kind of not necessarily doing a lot of smart things in public school, right? So it was like, so, and I needed that, and it was great and everything. But in my mind, I'm like, I watch my brother and my dad work on vehicles. They're so far ahead in a way, like to the point where I could spend the rest of my life really dedicating myself to a lot of these things, but I'll never be able to fully understand it and see it in the way that they see it when they open up the hood of a car or a truck.
Mhm.
And I think it really goes with like all other things too, though, because so for example, like when I was working in college, we had talked for a second. We were like, what if we did like a day where like I brought my brother in and he kind of talked to like the team about how to change their oil, right? Or like how to kind of like once over your vehicle before you're about to go on a 2 to 3 hour trip, right? And I'm like, yeah, that would be super valuable. And to be honest with you, I don't think that this is really what we're doing for them is any different. Like we are specialists, or this is our trade, right? Our trade is physical fitness, right? It's a little bit different, obviously, in terms of when you compare it to like other trades, right? Like culinary and, mechanics and electrician, because the medium that they work through is a little bit more black and white. It's a little more
Yeah.
straightforward, right?
Yeah.
If my brother breaks the bolt is broken and he has to get a new one. Whereas like we can do, we can make some mistakes with the human body, and obviously it's still resilient enough to overcome, which is,
Yeah, for sure.
good and bad. And, it's probably its own separate podcast as well. I feel like I've said that on this podcast like 17 times. It's like, I probably should start creating those podcasts on those things that I
Yeah,
said,
for sure. Right?
but I do think of it as like, because to be honest with you, like in the capacity I work with, like people don't know, like people just generally don't know. They don't have that framework. Right. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, yeah, so I think the impact that you can have is great enough to the point where people won't have to look back and say, hey, I wish I spent more time trying to gain an understanding and an educational framework around what training is, how to actually take care of myself and things that, but I don't see it much differently than the trades. You know what I mean? I don't see it much differently than, it's like, when I look at, some wires, like, do I have the background of an electrician, or at least some, and I don't, you know what I mean? And I'm like, I wish I had more of that, you know what I mean? But I spent most of my life watching SportsCenter on repeat over and over and over again, which I probably didn't need to watch 42 times a day, but I did when I was a kid because I was obsessed with sports, right? And that's probably why we are where we are now. But yeah, I think that's interesting though. You're providing essentially a craft in a trade to these young kids, you know what I mean? And I think that a lot of the trades you don't see in school anymore, right? Like they don't see as much unless you specifically go to trade school, right? So it's like that exposure just isn't there, but at least you're in a situation where you are providing them with some context to these things, and it's going to take them far. You know what I mean? It's going to give them that context. It's going to give them a healthier outlook on it, at least a problem solving and a decision making process, as opposed to just like the answers, like you said. So that's awesome. That's good stuff.
No, that's huge. I think the word you said, problem solving, is huge. And I mean, obviously I work in a private school, just like with the population of my kids. I mean, those are things that like you sort of, like that whole concept of like discovery, decision making, problem solvers. I mean, and that's what I try to tell my kids, especially that like want to get to the next level. It's like, hey, like those are really the athletes that tend to get to the next level. They're the best decision makers. They're PhDs in their sports. Like they understand those concepts. And like, a lot of our kids in this day and age, whether it might be technology or whatever's going on, like, like that free play stuff, like they don't really like know how to make choices, or make these decisions. And so it's like, even in a weight room, like with how we structure is like, man, I want to teach these kids like on how to make decisions for themselves, and like, hey, like actually like care about the person next to you, like, so like when we're in middle school, it's like we partner every kid up, and it's like, dude, like we almost do like a less is more mentality, where it's like, I'm not trying to get exercises in, like I want the exercise that we're doing to be done really well.
Right.
And I want you to learn how to coach it, so it's like, literally, it's like, hey, like this is like, if A1 is let's say it's like a goblet squat, A2 is coach the goblet squat. Right. And then like in between that moment, you're giving each other feedback. And so once again, you're creating a mental model for them to actually learn and understand these things, and they can also make choices for themselves. But, I think that's huge what you said, like teaching kids to problem solve, more tools in the toolbox. I mean, it's huge for these kids.
That's right. I mean, and that what you just outlined too is also, there's a ton of discipline in being able to like execute an exercise, and then also like remove yourself emotionally from the set that you just had, and also take care of your training partners. Right. I think that's something that's lost a little bit in terms of the weight room, etiquette that I've seen. Like when I was working in the private sector, that was something that was touched on like pretty early on. It was like, hey, like here's how we spot, here's how we side spot. And even when I was competing in powerlifting, we're talking about guys who were benching over like 900 pounds, some of the best, bench pressers in the world that I was fortunate enough to be able to be around. These guys are still spotting as soon as there's weight on the bar, what I mean? Side spotting, take care of each other, right? Because it's more of like a weight room etiquette, the discipline to be able to kind of focus and take care of your training partners, obviously, because, their life is in your hands, right? So, and you would hope that obviously they would do the same, like when you're under the bar, right? So I think that there's definitely, and then obviously the ability to coach it, explain it, and be able to articulate it to somebody else, that's obviously going to cement that educational piece further in their brains and into their mindset. But I think that's interesting. I love that aspect. I feel like that's lost a little bit. Certainly, you walk around weight rooms across the country. I mean, even some of the stuff that I think it's funny because like a lot of the stuff they put out on video, like a lot of these like schools will put on video. I'm like, man, you're not like embarrassed at all that like that's what is going on in your weight room. Just like it just looks like absolute chaos. And I'm not saying that it's got to be like militarized, but I mean, it's like there's got to be like some, you know what I mean? Like at least put like if that's what you're willing to put out there, then I can't imagine what it looks like on a daily basis. Because obviously, typically what you highlight are things that look good, that you think look good. And I'm like, I can't imagine imagine what it was look like on a daily basis. Like, dang, bro. But that's cool that you have them doing that though, because they've got to be like, all right, yeah, like like coaching something too. Like it gives them that like that powerful feeling of like, hey, coach trusts me to coach my teammate in this. You know what I mean? Like that's massive for them.
No, I mean, man, it's funny. Like you've probably had these days before, Anthony, where it's like, man, dude, I don't know what it is. Like, I'm just like a bad coach. Like you just like go through down those like, man, dude, I just feel like I'm just in a rut. Like, all these
Every
things,
day.
it's right. My wife, like, Nick, like, relax, and it was funny. Like was the nice thing about being a high school or middle school strength coach, especially at the private school, it's like, it's really like a classroom, right? So like when school's out of session, you're out of session. So it gives you these nice little breaks, so we're on Christmas break right now. But it's funny, so like I'm visiting family members. So like, I'm always trying to make sure like I'm getting some exercise in while I'm away. So, I'll go to like a general like Gold's Gym or LA Fitness. And it's like, it's funny, like I go to these places. And so for me, it's like, obviously I have our weight room. So like I'm always training by myself. I can do anything I want. So then I get to these places. I'm like, in those moments of where I feel like I'm a horrible coach, I'm like, man, dude, like at least I know like my kids like have the weight room etiquette concept, because these like most people like have no clue what they're doing, like
no idea.
Clue, and so you when you're able to sit back and like really peel the layers of like, wow, like strength conditioning, you can get really deep with the science of it, but then you can get really just like ground based, like, man, there's just like these core principles that you can teach these kids that really are going to just like transcend their lives, and so it's even cool, like we've really like worked on developing our middle school program over the past year and a half or two, and we're really to start seeing some really good results where it's like literally these middle schoolers are just like in the weight room, like, and have no problem just like working with each other, like coaching each other up. Hey, like great job, like, and there's like, working on like teaching a kid how to do a hinge pattern, and it's really cool. Like it just like it, like when you can teach kids to be self-sufficient, it makes you a better coach, because then you can sort of work on the 2 or 3 athletes that really need your attention a little bit more, and so it's just, but it's so true. I mean, like just being able to teach those foundational things to kids, I think it's really given me a lot of peace, because I think like when I first took a job like this, it's like your mind always goes to like performance, what happens on the field, wins, and then like when you get to a position like this, there's just things that are just so much more valuable. And if you don't have those things set in stone, man, it just doesn't really matter what comes out after that, so it's like, if I'm not teaching you discipline or consistency and hard work and looking out for your teammate and being a good teammate, then like the things that you actually do on the field, doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, like you can't really like turn things on and turn things off. And like, that's like the thing that you try to tell your kids, like, listen, the way you work in the weight room is a great microcosm of what you do out in the field.
Sure.
And so it's like, if you're not holding your neighbor to a standard or accountability or, loving them person the right way, it's like, how do I know you're doing the same thing out there?
Right.
And so, teaching kids that like everything matters, and that when you do things like at a high level, and, one of our core values at our school is just pursuing excellence, and so you can pursue excellence in so many different ways, and it sometimes it's not in this, in the stat comps, not how many touchdowns you get, how many points you score, but it's, it's the things that people remember like years down the road. Like, wow, man, like Nick was a really good teammate. He was always there. He was an everyday kind of guy. I knew every day what I could get from Nick, and those things are valuable, especially like in the workplace, right? It's like, man, if I can bank on, Johnny over here, I know he's the same person day in, day out, man, I'm going to take Johnny every day, rather than the emotional, psychopath that like, just like, has his highs and lows, maybe has a great ceiling, but man, his lows are lows, and so just like teaching kids, hey man, life's going to hit you, there's just different things that like, you might not be able to, I would say walk with yourself alone, but when you have a community, and you know how to work together, those things matter.
Yeah. And so it seems like you've got a really good grasp on like how you've handled that transition from like the impact that you were having to the impact that you're having now, right? Because everything you just described seems like in your mind, it's well thought out, right? Like you really have a great understanding of like what it is that you're providing in terms of information to these kids, how to, create a more robust person, right? Because a lot of these young kids are, trying to figure out their way in life, right? Trying to understand the idea of like, hey, what it means to actually like make your bed when you wake up in the morning and
Yep.
actually tie your shoes and show up on time and things like that. Like, they're trying to make sense of all the information that they're getting from people, which can be valuable. And that's not really like what I'm trying to get at, because there's a lot of nuances there. But I think like ultimately you had to get yourself to a point where you were like, this is what I was doing, and this is the impact that I was having, right? You talked about like wins, losses, performance. And then now it's like, this is what I am doing now, right? And I'm trying to like create, cultivate, like try to put together something that will actually like stick in these kids' brains for the rest of their lives. But I would imagine that was because like I struggled with that transition. I struggled with the transition going from like, all right, you are like one exclusive coach, right? Like you're like one of like four guys on a football staff. And then it was like, you're the guy that they go to for this, 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 and this. And then it was like, where we're talking about wins, we're talking about, breaking down the game, like all these things. And then it's like, you have to completely shift gears. Like you're still providing a ton of value, but it's in a completely different way. How did you kind of like navigate like getting yourself to that point where I was like, all right, I got to be able to disassociate from what I was doing then versus what I'm doing now? And it's not even so much like in my mind, it wasn't like, oh yeah, like you need to like, it was tough because in my mind, like I always felt like when you left college football, you were a quitter, right? Like everybody looked at you as like a quitter, right? So it's like, oh, you leave collegiate sports, what I mean, you're out of the professional. It's like you're out, you're not in the club anymore, right? And that may or may not be true, and I'm sure it is for some people, and it isn't for other people, and it's not really important. But like ultimately, I had to get myself to a point where it's like, this is just a different task that you are doing. Like this is a different stimulus, is a different way of obstacles you have to overcome. Just like it's just not even, you don't have to think. And I was able to do that pretty quickly, but I'm wondering for you, like, was that the same? Is it different? Like, how did you go about approaching that transition of having to kind of like disassociate yourself a little bit from what you were doing prior to what you were doing now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'm with you too, Anthony. I mean, I think actually I can attest to this. I mean, I think you're seeing more and more really high level qualified coaches moving to the high school ranks
Yeah.
because, just, I mean, I think just from a lot of different reasons, but honestly, more importantly, man, there's just a need for it.
Sure.
I mean, like literally, like if I was running my own school, man, like, dude, I would like, we're having like two strength coaches. They're getting paid really a lot of money because there's so much value here. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, it it definitely took some time. I mean, just like as I look at the spectrum of my career, and I think this is like, it's funny, like I came from like a semi-private mold, like that's really my first exposure. And you're just like soaking up like knowledge and
Sure.
like, Cressy, all, Charlie Fran, whatever you can name, all these different modules and models of like learning from people. And like, you're just trying to consume this information.
Mm.
And you're like, this is gonna get me to the top, you
Sure.
know. And for the longest time I was doing that, and then like, I start moving into a little bit more collegiate setting, professional setting, more team training dynamics, and you have all this information, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, how do I actually use this information to get the results that I want? And the thing that I think I learned more is like, you just have to coach. Like you just have
Yeah.
to coach. And then I think when I even got to Second Baptist, my lens was always still like performance. And like, I think I was always a great relationship builder, even if
Sure.
my mind was like, it's all about performance and like getting like this, this, and this. I was always a great relationship builder. So I think naturally people just generally thought I cared about them, which is true.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
always care about people. But I think when I really got to Second Baptist, you know, you really start realizing like, hey, like what really matters, and I think the fact that like, you really start talking about the soul of a kid, like you just don't know the impact you're going to have on a kid. You just really
Right.
don't, like, and it's funny, like you don't even think that like you're doing a whole lot. Like I remember like
Yeah.
days where I was like in the dog days, felt like a horrible coach. I would get like an email from a parent, like, man, like you literally don't know the impact you've had on my kid. And
Yeah.
it's like in my mind, I'm like, dude, like what did I do? And
Yeah.
it's like, man, like I guess I showed up every day, and I think kids see the passion I have about my job, and
Sure.
I think that's the thing. It's like I try to program and do things the right way and show the level of education and show the information that I know and put it in a program.
Sure.
Now it's more of like not necessarily so that like kids know that I have a great program, but kids know that like, wow, I'm passionate and this matters, and
Sure.
I care about them,
Yeah.
and I think it always comes back down to the athlete or the student or the general population that you're working with. Like, ultimately speaking, like when they really understand that they are valued,
Yeah,
and like, man, like I'm gonna journey with you. Let's do this together. And hey,
sure.
here's some mistakes I've made in my road, and like don't make those same mistakes. I think like that just puts a huge amount of value on your program, and getting kids to sort of value it. And then from there, like the athletic performance stuff just naturally comes in and goes with its flow.
Sure.
But I think really like my initially, like I started with like, man, it's all about information and being the best performance coach you could possibly be. And then ultimately realizing, wow, it's actually about like relationships and actually caring about people. And then because I care about people, I can actually use the information that I'm passionate about to
Yeah.
help people, and so I
Yeah.
think that's really like where I got.
Yeah, I think that's so it seems like what you're saying is like the actual like content and the tasks of the new job kind of forced you to almost like just forget about like what was going on previously. It was like, hey,
Yep.
like, all right, well, I have all this in front of me now. Like, this is a totally different like
Yep.
challenge and obstacle. It's like I don't have time to think about what I was doing prior and compare myself to like, what that was and try to make sense of
Mhm.
like, how that fit into my career and all that stuff. It's like, at least that's how I felt as well. Like it was kind of just got to the point where it was like, okay, well, I don't know, you just become so like I don't know the word, but you just know you got to get a job done, right? Like you
Yes,
get a new
exactly.
job and you're like,
Yep.
I got this to do, so I don't have time to think about like how I feel about like what I'm doing now versus what I was doing. That's like you become really in tune with like trying to figure out what the skills that are needed,
Yep.
what skills you need to have in order to actually execute that job, what skills are needed to actually finish the
Yep.
job of what you're doing now. I think that's where I like kind of fell on that too. I was like, well, all right, so like I have these like major tasks in front of me now. Like these are the things that I need to do in order to like obviously execute this particular job and do well for this company or this school or whatever the case may be. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of what it gets down to. And it's funny because I was talking recently to somebody who works in professional sports, and they work in a sort of like referee umpire situation, right? And they were like, yeah, I was like, how do you like how does like any sort of like governing body of sports like get to a point where, or like any sport like get to a point where they're okay with like deciphering whether there's any fandom within the referees who are obviously refereeing the game, right? And he was like, honestly, it gets to a point where you have you just have such a desire to do well for the job and then to do the job is and execute the craft as well as you possibly can, that you don't even think about like fandom from like when you were a kid or like what
Yep.
team you were
Yep.
rooting for or anything like that. You know what I mean? Which I thought was really interesting. And that's kind of how I feel about this situation here is it's like you get so obsessed with like trying to do a good job or what you're doing that it's like I haven't thought about any of those things, those concerns that I had when I first took the where I was kind of just like, oh, like, I thought like, you kind of everybody thinks that everybody's thinking about them all the time, right? So I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh man, like all my college football guys are probably just like, this dude quit, like he couldn't hack it, you know what I mean? And I'm like, I don't think anybody cares. Like, I don't think anybody's
Yeah.
thinking about me at all. And that's probably
Yep.
why I left. You know what I mean? It's like I don't think anybody gives a shit. So yeah, it's funny how that kind of works out, but I think that's cool. You got about like 10 minutes left here. If you got like 10 minutes, or you could.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So kind of just wanted to get into like some final touches on like your thoughts of like this industry in general, right? So like
Mhm.
obviously we've talked kind of like in a roundabout way about like things that are going on, but I think it's really cool, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, start documenting people's thoughts, right? And they're document their journeys, but also document where they are in their line of thinking along this journey, right? So in your estimation and kind of your experience, what do you think are some of the pros and cons of what you've experienced in our field, right? Like it could be good and bad experiences for you personally, or it could just be honestly just the good and the bad that you see, obviously in
Yeah.
your travels of what things are going well and what things are, I guess I would say not necessarily going wrong, but things that are, opportunities for lessons learned and for us to continue to like refine our skills to continue to move forward. What would those be for you?
Yeah. No. Wow. Great question. I would say, um, I would say one of the biggest things that like I feel like tried to grasp is and I would say there's tons of strength conditioning professionals that are like this,
Mhm.
but just once again, just like realizing that like we're a community together, right? And we're
Right.
all trying to chase the same goals of just impacting the you know the clients, the students, the athletes, the professional athletes that we're working with,
Sure.
and I think a lot of times, like, not to say that people can be egotistical, but like, you can like, you always can see like people just like, oh, like I don't like this guy or I don't like that guy and he's not doing things the right way. I just think from my perspective, like we're always trying to journey together and like become better, so like, I never for myself at least try to like look at someone's program and assume that like I would do it better because I don't know their context and their setting and what's going on, and so like, just always like for me, I think one of the big things is just like always like being able to learn from somebody and like build connections and help each other along the way, because you really just don't know the value that somebody else can have, and so I think like especially in our profession, that would be one thing I would say to a young professional. Just like try to meet as many coaches as you can. It's okay that you might make a mistake because you're going to. I make them daily. And like, don't attack somebody for making a mistake, like, hey, like, come alongside them and try to make them a better coach. So, just use your resources as a coach, that'd be number one. And then number two, I mean, I think really, obviously me having like a high school lens, middle school lens, there's just such, I think we're just missing the boat on like really, at least in the educational system, like really valuing a strength and conditioning professional at that level and really compensating them for it. Like to me, like that should be, a staple for any high school, I mean, especially at big public schools. Like, I mean, you're even looking at like 2 or 3 coaches because maybe you're able to testify this to a little bit, Anthony, but like, I think one thing that kids, or at least every college program I've seen from a kid that like is going to go to that college, is just nuts and bolts and like rudimentary patterns. And I think the reason why, because it's not has nothing to do with the coach. It's like the coach is actually doing a great job. But I think what really it is like they realize that none of these kids really have true good exposure to what good performance and strength conditioning is actually like.
Right.
And so, they're, I bet the first, 3-4 weeks of the time that freshman is there, like, I mean, they're probably almost trying to reinforce a hinge pattern.
Right.
Man, what if you nail that like as a 6th grader? And now you have 6 full years of a really good coach, and it's like now they get to college, man, and now, man, you could have all the fun in the world with that athlete.
Absolutely.
And so I would say that is like really like, I don't know how you change that, but like, if you're a school, man, like you should put every dollar and dime down to get a top tier professional that really sees an holistic approach. I mean, even as you start in physical education of like, what is teaching, like, I think like just at like even for your general pop people, like, making them like train like an athlete. Cause like, why would you want to like not run and jump and throw and like that's going to make you more resilient, even like anti-fragile, if you want to use that word. It's like, dude, like, I'm just like, you're going to hit me, but guess what? I'm going to be stronger because of it. And once again, like we only live short lives. So like, how much better can you like just make people better for it? So I would say that like just getting like people in there in the educational system and like actually like teaching them curriculum to move well would be huge for, I think, everyone.
Yeah, I think that's so true too. And like, I think when it comes to actually having some of those skills transfer into, you think about it, you get a high school athlete and you're a college strength and conditioning coach, and you kind of have an idea of what they have been and have not been taught. Right. And I think a lot of coaches, especially when they're giving them like, they're like, pre like enter college program or whatever, it's like, yeah, it could be like basic stuff, and it should be basic stuff. Some of the stuff is like, some of the stuff that I've seen when I was working in the private sector, be like, yeah, like I'm going to this school or whatever, and this is the program they gave me. And I'm like, wow, I'm even surprised, like some of the stuff that's thrown on there, because you have no idea like what they can and cannot do already, right? And so there's a little bit of like, there's a decent amount of trust that's put into there. But I always thought at the private sector, I was kind of like, my job is to just prepare these guys for what they're going to be able to do next, or what they're going to be required to do at the next level. So if that means, they need to understand how to do a snatch or whatever, it's like, I mean, whether I care about the snatch or not is not important anymore. It's just making sure that they can actually do this thing well. But I think that like, but just imagine if we had that on like we go deep into the levels of like, that's how our society is. Like, imagine like that's how our culture is here in America. It's like, hey, starting in like 5th grade or whatever, like we're going to start to teach you like 4 like basic movement patterns for like sport, be like shuffle, cutting, crossover, drop step, right? Like we're going to teach you these like basic 4 movement patterns, right? And you should be able to do those all throughout like youth sports, because they're kind of present at all times. And then we're going to teach you like 4 main things. We're going to teach you like squat, bench, deadlift and hinge or carry, whatever, what I mean? It's like, dude, the amount, like how far that could do, that low hanging fruit right there. And like, we're not even talking about like loading anything heavy or anything like that. Just like that low, imagine if that was your culture, where it's like, yeah, we're like in our school, in our like country, we have kids starting their physical preparation journey that, you know, in like 5th, 6th grade, and it's in a very scaled and like, you know, controlled manner. But right now, I, you know, not to criticize like physical education, I don't know, like, I don't even know what it is at that level. You know what I mean? I just know like what I see and like what I've gotten, you know what I mean? Like what I've seen come across, and obviously what we continue to have, you know what I mean? When it comes to like people who are, you know, moving on past college and are just general pop and just kind of like trying to stay healthy now. It's like, I know that there's a lacking of that. So yeah, there's probably a lot of good things to come for this industry in terms of if you really want to do good. But you know, I'm hoping that there get some really high quality, high level professionals to work with younger adults and get them before, you know what I mean, they start to set into some of these ways. So I think people like yourself are doing an excellent job, and really appreciate obviously that you have like someone like yourself at that level. So good for you, Nick. I'm really pumped to have you on this podcast for sure. What I would like to give you the floor, if you have any like final thoughts, final words, or any and like, you know, social media and anything else you want to plug, any work or anything like that for people where they can find you if they want to reach out to you, anything that you've done that you want, you know, people to, even if it's just like, you know, the Second Baptist School website or something like that, whatever it is you want, and then you know, final words, any closing thoughts or whatever, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, no, well, first off, Anthony, thank you for having me once again. I guess from a social media, if like anyone wants to follow me, really we use it as just like our page, just to sort of you know, just put some content out for students to learn a little bit more, and then we try to highlight our athletes, but we'll always post some stuff there. It's like it's Mass Strength, which is MASC, and then the _ bottom line strength. Okay. That's the one we do on Instagram. And then, yeah, if anyone wants to contact me and talk shop, I love it. I mean, it would be pretty much, and Mascioli at secondbaptistschool.org. You can always reach out to me, and I love to talk. But yeah, no, I mean, I think really the only thing I like to say is, you know, I think what I try to tell young people, and here's the thing, I'm only 31. I still consider myself extremely young, and still so much to grow in this industry. I mean, there's been people that have been doing it for 20, 30, if not 40 years. And so like trying to gain information from them is just so pivotal. But, you know, really, you know, my main thing would be like, don't feel like you need to make a decision right away on where you want to be. And maybe some people are like, dude, I want to be a professional major league strength conditioning coach, you know, and guess what? Work toward it and do it, you know, but don't like get down on yourself for like getting to like AA and realizing, hey, like, you know, maybe this is not what I want to do. And that's totally okay. You know, you know, professional sport, like every place, and I think in strength conditioning, you know, has its pros and has its cons. You know, I can tell you this, you know, I can honestly say at times, like the job that I currently have now has been some of the most frustrating moments of my entire life. But I'll tell you what, it's been some of the most rewarding moments of my entire life, you know. And you just got to really figure out what matters to you most, you know, if that's in the semi-private setting, the hours you want to work there, or you do want to work with pro athletes. Like, listen, there's always pros and there's always cons, and you just sort of have to figure out what works for you, and experiences will give you that. So try as many experiences as you can, and then make a choice from there, but you're never going to go wrong just when you try to learn.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate that. It's a great way to end out the podcast. That's a great message in general. I appreciate that, Nick. Well, listeners, we'll catch you guys next time. Nick, thanks again for hopping on, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.